Alright, I'm back with another Outriders video, and today it's not really just kind of opinions on things, it's actual breaking news. I might go into the full details of this later on, but for now, this does relate to what I was going to talk about today anyway, and that is the fact that we are barely a week into launch here, and there is already kind of discrimination against one specific class in Outriders. Among endgame players, and I think that is misguided on their part, and also the reaction to this by People Can Fly also seems somewhat misguided now that we know what the actual patch notes are. I have praised Outriders for having a pretty good diverse balance of classes. I think all four of the classes are very well made and very fun to play, and all have their strengths. It's kind of easy to see what the role is that people are supposed to fill. Like Techno is a little more kind of support based. The Pyromancer is more of like a mage caster type. Trickster is more of like an assassin DPS character, and Devastator is more of a tank. That said, you can build all these characters in a variety of different ways, and the way Outriders Endgame is set up, you are going kind of just for max DPS, at least that's what people think, in order to clear these timed expeditions as fast as you can, or clear them at all. And that results in a situation where people want the fastest CPS classes, and that has led to a situation where Devastators that are more tank-based generally are getting like actively kicked out of parties because they show up, and just the simple act of being a Devastator means they're getting kicked out because people assume they won't do enough DPS. First of all, I think this is stupid because it's been like 4 days since anyone really hit the endgame, and it is way too soon to rest a judgment on really the endgame potential of any of these classes. And I have seen plenty of Devastator builds that are extremely strong, even in, Challenge Tier 15 in the endgame. There are certainly ways to build them out where they do a ton of DPS. Also, like, DPS is not the be-all, end-all. I don't know about you, but I have run many expeditions, the ones I've managed to get into, where, surprise, my team is always dying because they don't have survivability and their glass cannons. So it is not always the best solution to have like max DPS at the cost of everything else. And sometimes you need a third character that is able to survive and run around and reviving your corpse when you cannot do it. Usually this is me on Trickster, where I just run over to someone and pop a bubble and then revive them. The revive system needs some work because it is very hard to revive anyone when there are always 80 enemies shooting at you from any direction, and it resets the timer on being hit, which is bad. But it's people are being way too close-minded about a single class this soon. Devastator is the one class I haven't done yet. I have now fully completed every mission and side mission on my Technomancer and Trickster on Xbox. I am maybe about halfway through their campaign on Pyromancer, but I still put, I don't know, probably at least 5, 6, 7, 8 hours on Devastator back in the demo, and I have watched plenty of friends and streamers use Devastator to great effect, and there are ways to make that class very strong. And part of this to me is also kind of just how it's poor how the matchmaking system is set up in Outriders, where I wish it would just take 3 people, launch them into a randomized expedition. Instead, it does this thing where everyone goes to camp, and like people are hanging out and sitting at vendors endlessly, and I guess people are inspecting other people and then booting them if they don't think they're strong enough, and this and that. And like it's just a really kind of awkward, cumbersome system. And people said, the current Devastator thing is like the old like Destiny 1 must have Gallarhorn, like, or else you can't raid or do whatever. But in this case, it's even more dismissive because like Gallarhorn was stupidly overpowered. But I think people are writing out Devastator way too quickly here, and I will be pretty upset if I get to endgame and Devastator is somehow, still kind of blacklisted by the community. Like, it is hard enough to find a friggin' expedition that is actually, coherent enough to launch itself at this point. So to get into a game and then just to get kicked for whatever reason is obnoxious. But now we know what the potential, quote, temporary fix is for this, and Outriders has just released a bunch of patch notes that do not have any Devastator buffs, which I guess is okay, considering that, again, I think people are just kind of underestimating the strength of the class, period, and it might be harder to just instantly buff it to, maybe then if they buff it and it's already stronger than people think, then that becomes the dominant class, over everything within a week. What they are doing, however, is nerfing probably the two most popular endgame classes, Technomancer and Trickster, and with a specific focus on the blighted rounds and the what do I call them, time rounds, what are they called, twisted rounds, in terms of how much those builds are too easy to make and they output too much damage. So Trickster got hit with some huge nerfs. They nerfed a bunch of its different skill nodes on its tree and reduced their kind of damage values because they thought they were doing too much damage combined with Twisted Rounds. Twisted Rounds got a huge cooldown increase from, I think, 16 seconds to 25 seconds, meaning you cannot use it less or as much at all. Technomancer, a little less severe. They didn't nerf the cooldown on Tox Rounds, but there's a node where you're now doing less damage to toxic enemies, and the vulnerable status is now it's less of a debuff than it was before, so it's weaker, and that affects me and my freeze build too, because that relies on enemies becoming vulnerable to a certain extent as well when they're frozen. So that's kind of obnoxious. And then Pyromancer got something where one of its values was nerfed. Maybe it might be damage against burning enemies or something, or damage against ash enemies, I'm not sure, but it was a similar level nerf where it was like down from 30% buff to 15%. And so what they've done is they've nerfed the three classes that are not Devastator, and the community is pushing back against this, I would say somewhat understandably, because my position on this is that it has been barely a week since this game has been out, and it has been a couple of days since anyone even made it to the end game, much less started formulating end game builds. And what percent of, like, 0.0001% of players might have like a full legendary set now and are making like crazy endgame builds? Like, I think it is way too soon to start seeing like the one build that people came up with after like 72 hours in the end game and being like, nerf, because like these nerfs affect the actual campaign experience too. And for Trickster, just like leveling Twisted Rounds is going to be way more of a pain now, and it's not, like, forget speed farming the end game. Like, that's something people were using to beat the campaign normally. So these nerfs like might affect these top tier end game builds, and yet they will also affect the 90% of other players that are just trying to get through the campaign, and then suddenly their whole class has been nerfed because of some end game stuff. And like, I'm always in favor of like nerfing things that are overpowered, and like maybe I just haven't like witnessed the full sheer unbridled terror of these end game builds, and they really just do need a nerf. But this just seems like they're moving so quickly, like based on how long the game has been out and how many people are actually in the end game. And like, it's, I'm familiar with these games, and like metas shake out, but like you develop one strategy and then everyone copies that, and so it snowballs. But like, I don't even think there's been time enough for people to fully kind of flesh out all these different builds. And like, I'm seeing a lot of diverse builds. Like, I'm seeing, all my Destiny content creator friends are now making Outriders builds, and yeah, some of them rely on these specific skills, but like a lot of them are more diverse, and like you get people soloing content with stuff that has nothing to do with this. So I think there are powerful builds all over the place. So to just like target this stuff so quickly seems a bit of a rush to judgment to me. And I guess it won't really matter to me because like I'm not in the Ultra Endgame. I have held off really doing the end game, especially on Xbox, because there's been so many connectivity issues, and there's the inventory crash bug that is kind of wrecks my game anytime I check my inventory in the expedition camp, which is not great. All that stuff is supposed to be getting fixed in this patch too, but we'll see. This patch, whatever, all these nerfs and all these fixes and stuff is going live sometime next week. They don't have an exact date for it, but I find, I don't know, it's a weird situation to be in already, where both I think the community is overreacting to the whole Devastator problem, in that, they say all the other classes are more powerful than Devastator before really giving it a chance or really understanding what it's capable of. Like, I refuse to believe like anyone who's booting a Devastator from their group has like actually sat down and like mapped out every awesome build you can do with Devastator, or like understand what it can do. Conversely, I don't think people can fly's reaction is great to this either, nerfing the other three classes within a matter of days of people getting to the end game. That just seems so quick, and I don't really understand why they did this. They also nerfed a bunch of loot sources too. I'll go into that maybe tomorrow, but like, it's a lot, and no one really likes to see a huge amount of nerfs in a PvE only game, because there's no kind of like unfair advantage per se, because it's only PvE content. It's not like it's unbalancing the game within a PvP setup. So this doesn't really make a great first impression on players. A game like Borderlands does nerf things sometimes, but they are constantly buffing underused skills rather than just kind of nerfing whatever's the most strong at a given time. They do that sometimes, but it's such a weird tone to open with just this wide slate of nerfs after just a couple days of people making endgame builds. So we'll see what happens. If you see a Devastator in your party, don't boot them. Just let them try and do what they're going to do. They might surprise you. I don't think that's a good policy to enact, and I think we should kind of nip this in the bud before it becomes a regular thing. And especially once I finally build my Devastator, I do not want to be getting booted out of parties. So I won't boot you if you don't boot me. So that's where we are. No EV cameos today. Sorry, she's at the vet. I gotta go pick her up soon. She's okay. She's just getting allergy tested. But yeah, I will see you guys later. And just if you haven't subscribed to my newsletter, God Rolls, you can do that in the comments here. And yeah, I appreciate it. I will be doing more Outrider videos as long as I'm playing this, but I also have the Diablo 2 technical alpha that goes live 12 minutes ago, so I gotta start downloading that. So I might do a video or two on that depending on how it goes. But all right, I'll see you guys soon. Take care.